So as I say, we're talking about virtual reality and employee experience today. So what we're going to be covering in the next hour, slightly under an hour probably, we're going to talk about some VR basics. If you don't know what virtual reality is, or you've got a sense but you're not quite sure, don't worry. We're absolutely going to cover the basics of virtual reality. We're going to look at virtual reality in action and the employee experience. We will give a tiny bit of context about what we mean by employee experience as well, just to make sure that we're on the same page, so we're all sort of exploring the same thing. We're going to look at where next with virtual reality and the employee experience, and then we'll need plenty of time for your questions. So do chuck them in the chat as we go along, and we'll definitely get to those at the end, or make a note, and we will come to those at the end. So I'm Belinda Ganaway. Hello, if I haven't met you before. I'm Strategy Director of Culture Activation Agency Fathom XP. We do three things. We do culture discovery. We bring different aspects of organisational culture to life, and we also do capability building around the cultural levers and also employee experience as well. I am super excited to be joined today by Tim Fleming, a fellow Brightonian of Future Visual, and also friend and colleague and collaborator Emma Bridger from People Lab. Tim, do you want to just quickly introduce yourselves and Future Visual, and then Emma, I'll get you to do the same.
Sure, thanks Belinda. Yeah, lovely to meet you all. I'm Tim Fleming, founder of Future Visual, founded Future Visual in 2015. Prior to that, I've worked in graphics and hardware for my whole career, and I've always been fascinated and super interested in how visual environments move people, how they change people's perception of their experience, and always sought to sort of work with the highest end hardware and graphical environments to move people. So yeah, Future Visual, founded in 2015, worked on sort of high risk, high value training, of which I'll go into later in some of the slides. And now we have a strong focus on bringing people on any device into these immersive environments. So our focus is collaboration in immersive spaces using VR, AR, desktop and mobile.
Thanks, Tim. And Emma, a little bit further up the coast in Hastings, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Talking about, sort of collaboration online, social media faux pas. I think the first one is not to use a photo of yourself that's 10 years old. So you probably look at that photo thinking, she looks nothing like that. I know. I need to update my photo, but I'm just clinging on to that photo from 10 years ago. Really lovely to meet you all, albeit virtually online, what have you. I'm Emma Bridger, I'm founder and MD of People Lab. We are essentially experts in employee experience and engagement. So we help companies to design, create, deliver amazing experiences for their people that result in higher engagement and all the wonderful positive outcomes that bring. So we basically work with organisations to create experiences that make a positive impact on the organisation. My background is a psychologist, and particularly positive psychology. So I'm really interested in the effects that VR has on the way that we feel, the way that we behave, and the kind of psychological element of it. So really excited to hear more from Tim today and find out more about this whole area.
Fantastic, thanks guys. Yeah, that's a great intro into kind of why we started exploring this topic with Tim. So Emma and I are currently co-writing a book on employee experience design, and one of the key principles for our approach to employee experience design is empathy. And just super interested when we were looking at this as in the different contexts that VR pops up in around empathy, and it's been described as an empathy machine alongside other things. So we've been really interested in this whole world, and that's, so we thought it was a really fascinating topic and we wanted to bring it to you. So I'll get Tim to explore some of the basics. One of the things that I didn't mention that we are going to do today is we are going to look at, actually, if you're sitting there and you are in a corporate, whether you're on L&D or people or culture or whatever, we are going to have a quick look at the end about, well, actually, if I'm interested in getting started with VR, what do I do next? So we will give that practical angle as well. But Tim, let's go back to basics. Tell us what VR is.
Okay, thanks Belinda. Yep, so in describing what VR is, we slightly confusingly have a picture of a TV. And that's to try and demystify it a bit. Obviously when you think of VR, it comes with a sort of lot of sci-fi type baggage, and we think it's this kind of strange thing that lives in research labs or in very esoteric science fiction films. And obviously that's changed over the last couple of years with Facebook buying Oculus, and VR is in kind of its third act, or has been reborn for the third time. But essentially VR is just a format. It's just a way of looking at content. We had books, we had radio, we had TV, now we have VR. And it's as simple as that. The difference being that the way in which you view virtual reality content is that you are normally immersed in that content. And obviously immersed is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot these days for all kinds of different reasons. We want people to be immersed in their job, immersed in their employee experience. But what immerse really means is that we have people's attention. And so, that's what VR really is. It's just another format. Belinda, if you could do the next slide. Belinda, I'll just go like that for the next slide. Little air gesture.
I have just cut my driving finger, and so which is why the slides aren't moving in quite the streamlined way I'd like them to, because my finger's not working in quite the right way I'd like it to.
Okay, so here's the next critical part of the VR experience, which is, of course, our perception of what we are looking at. I'm sure you've all heard the stories of, when people first listened to radio shows, they really believed there was a Martian invasion. There's the wonderful example of when people first saw that film piece with the train coming into the station, they all ran out of the cinema going, there's a train coming through the wall. So essentially the second critical component of VR is our brain, and is our perception of what is happening and is what is going on in front of us. Now, the VR that we specialize in future visual, and we're going to go through the various sort of levels of VR, is that the area we specialize in, are almost interested in, is a more sort of full immersion, for fully interactive environments. And this is where your brain, although it knows it's in a sort of CGI or computer generated environment, it very quickly goes, well, that plane feels real, that fire feels real, I'm having a sort of biochemical response that I would normally have in real life. And that's why we can create experiences that feel much realer, or prepare us for these high risk scenarios that are difficult to create in real life. In fact, one of our sort of guiding mantras at Future Visual is, we use VR to provide access to situations and scenarios that are either physically impossible or prohibitively expensive. And that can be anything from high risk training to creating those sort of social interaction experiences that you might want to do with employee experience in terms of empathy, that are just difficult to create in real life. Even if you use actors, there's a certain difficulty in pushing it up the realism and therefore the embedded experience. So anyway, second critical part of what is VR is our perception and involvement and real buy-in to what we are seeing and experiencing. Okay, here's my air pointer, Belinda. Oh, there you go, well done, thank you, speeding up. Okay, so just to take you all through some basics, because obviously, high-end VR all sounds great, but there are other variations available. And one of the sort of earliest incarnations of virtual reality is 360 video. That's where people shoot video with a 360 camera, and therefore you have a representation all around your head. And this is kind of quite a cheaper way to get into VR. At a very basic level, if you wanted to do employee experience with another office, another location, so they could see what this office looked like, that was just a kind of slight level up on the immersion than a 2D traditional view, then you could do 360 video. So you could also do that for onboarding, so sort of pre-onboarding familiarization, if you wanted someone to get a feel for the campuses. If you could do the next slide. So what 360 video does and what live action capture does is it just shoots the scene in sort of a very long rectangle and then wraps it all back together. You can do some interesting things with this rather than just doing straight 360 capture. So the next level up would be putting in graphical elements within this live action scene. So going back to our capture example where we've captured someone's premises for familiarization, you could then drop in sort of CGI arrows or points of interest. So you're getting this slightly augmented view. If you go to the next slide. So yeah, just to talk about some of the flavors of hardware that are on offer. So you may have heard of standalone VR, or you may have heard of Oculus Quest. So Oculus Quest is the new standalone headset, which basically means you're untethered. So when we used to do these kind of presentations and talking about entry level of VR, it used to be, well, you could start with Google Cardboard and work your way up. But I think, really entry level now, you should be sort of aspiring for a standalone device which has 6 degrees of freedom with the controllers. That means with the controllers, when you actually move your hand, it moves in the space. Now these Quest headsets they retail at $399, so they're still expensive, but for the capability that they offer is very significant. And standalone VR is where we are going to go in the future. Just the ease of use, the barrier to friction. But this Quest is sort of the first incarnation of standalone that actually works well. Go to that. So this is tethered VR. This is what we tend to use a lot more. So you're in a space and you've actually set up base stations around the room. So with some of our clients where they're looking to implement the more high-end VR experience, they actually have dedicated rooms within organizations, or they've actually set up training hubs with training providers. And the model there was that they would have these quite sophisticated training hubs and people would go to the hubs. Now, obviously that model has been challenged slightly, but the premise of tethered VR is that you have these spaces that are decked out with lighthouses and you are tethered to a PC. Obviously, if you're tethered to a PC, you've got a much more powerful source of rendering. So what you're seeing can have more detail in it. And because of the lighthouses, the tracking on your hands is very accurate. So you get this sub-millimeter kind of tracking environment. And again, obviously that adds to more immersion. So beyond tethered, this is what the future might look like. Now VR gloves, like on the right hand side, they don't seem to have changed much since the 80s. They kind of look like that in the 80s, but they've got people are still pushing this dream of haptics, and haptics being one of the holy grails. I still think it's at a very kind of early R&D phase, as you can see by the sort of the state of it on the right. But anyway, that's a set of gloves on the right called they are called Haptics with an X, and apparently do give very good sensory feedback. You can literally feel like you're squashing a ball, or you can even get kind of raindrop type feels on your sensation on your hand. And on the left, you've got something called a Tesla suit, which I have tried, and it's kind of deeply unpleasant, really. What it does is to simulate haptics. It's essentially triggers little electric shocks around your body. So if you want to mimic the sensation of getting punched, your muscles kind of contract, and so it's sort of like light electrocution all over your body, which some people may love. Anyway, so that's kind of looking further down the line in terms of the hardware. As I mentioned, where we see the real interesting intersection of this is how people can come together in immersive spaces using any device. Because even the Quest I talked about at £400 is still pricey. But if you can get people coming into immersive spaces using their existing devices, if they can use their mobile, if they can use their laptop, but you could also have people leading the session via VR, so they're able to show off some of these slightly more detailed features. That's where you're really opening up, true sort of cross-platform, cross-reality benefits and interaction. And this is a big focus of where we're going. And obviously with the sort of remote environment that we're in now, this collaboration piece of bringing people together, bringing your team together for a more powerful experiences has certainly gone up the index of interesting and kind of relevant approaches to teamwork.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for that introduction. Before we go on, now that we're hopefully on the same page about what we're talking about when we're talking about VR, I thought it'd be useful to do a quick poll, if that's okay. So Katie, you're right to prompt the poll to come up on the screen. just really like to know who we've got with us today, and what's your familiarity with virtual reality and augmented reality. So if you can just click one of the, so 1, I've never used it before, 5, I'm a complete pro. Great, okay. So most of us are in that kind of new to it phase. So a couple of people are very much at the far end of really knowing this stuff, really being experienced with it, and a bigger chunk of us down the other end with just starting to look at this and take an interest. So thank you, that's really, really useful. I'm going to switch that off. Click on that, lovely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by employee experience, and then I'm going to ask Emma just to give us her perspective from a kind of psychology and neuroscience, and then we're going to get a little bit deeper into some of the applications of virtual reality. So, as I've already said, we do a lot of work around employee experience and employee experience design. So what do we mean by that? There are a wide variety of different definitions of employee experience. When we talk about employee experience, we're really talking about the experience that an employee has of you from the first time they've heard about you in the context of you as an employer to the moment they leave you, and then they come back, and way, way beyond that as well, because we believe that actually employee experience is something that sits in people's minds. So they take their experience with you as a memory. So it doesn't stop when somebody leaves you, which makes it quite big and scary. Obviously, there are a lot of societal changes, technological changes, generational changes that are really impacting people's expectations of the workplace. And actually our expectations directly impacts our experience as well. So these two things are really related. And we really like this quote from Gallup that really, for us, really sums it up, that employees have really become the consumers of the workplace. And that creates a really, really new context for employers. So VRAR is showing up, as Tim's already said, really across the employee experience, where it sort of started off in that very technical training, where training is expensive or difficult due to whatever sort of excess reasons, or whatever it may be. So doctors, engineers, pilots, that sort of thing. Where it started there, that's really become a gateway to many broader applications across the business. And Tim and I were chatting yesterday about the COVID effect, and really suggesting that Tim was saying, we can get into this in detail a bit more later, the fact that the COVID effect has probably given the VR and AR in the workplace a sort of a 3-year tailwind, which is really, really interesting. As I say, we can explore where. So where we are seeing it popping up and where we think it's really interesting is moving beyond technical training to these, I don't like the expression soft skills, but you know what I mean, people and managerial skills training. So Walmart, in terms of at scale, are really, really pushing on this from both the operational and a customer experience training soft skills. It says they've got 17,000 headsets in store. So and they're using it just both for training for everyday situations, so high stakes situations such as Black Friday. It's also being, as Tim mentioned, it's being used in both attraction and recruitment. So actually giving people, so Deutsche Bahn are using it to give people an experience of doing a wide range of jobs that might be appealing to them, but how do you ever imagine what it's like being a train driver until you've actually driven a train? So that sort of thing. So it's being used on an attraction level and also on an assessment level. So that's what I mean on the recruitment bit. So Lloyds Banking Group are using it in their graduate training programs as part of that assessment program. It's being used on onboarding. IKEA are doing some work with using virtual reality to help new recruits settle in quicker, and also Fidelity Investments. These are just a few examples of where it's being used. I think, you know, the COVID effect, I think virtual onboarding is going to have to be given a real rethink, that shift from just taking a sort of a physical onboarding process and just going, oh, we'll do it via Zoom, it'll be fine. There's a different set of needs associated to onboardings. People operating in a very different context, and their emotional needs are very, very different. And so it'd be interesting to see how VR is used to support that. It's being used in terms of employee relocation, so helping people understand what a new city or a new country is going to be like. It's being used in behaviour change, so a lot around diversity and inclusion, so understanding people's behaviours and their micro behaviours. So it's both being used in a sort of a management, people management training context, and also looking at sort of cultural norms and how you are within a culture and how your behaviours influence that culture. The last one for me, and I think this is, for us, it's really exciting and really interesting because we do a lot of work around employee experience design. It's also being used by Hilton Hotels to help their corporate teams understand what it's like to actually be doing a job in a hotel room when you're potentially turning over hundreds of hotel rooms in a day, and helping those corporate teams understand what it means when you tweak one bit of that process, what it means for the experience of the people actually delivering that work. So we thought that was a really, really interesting example as well. So just a few examples from us. Tim will go into some more detail with some of those and some of his own as well. But Emma, I'd really love to get your perspective from a sort of a psychology or neuroscience perspective about what you've heard so far and what your thoughts are.
Cool, thanks for that. Yeah, it's a really fascinating area, this, isn't it? And I'm by no means an expert, but definitely got some research to do into the kind of the neuroscience of using VR. So I think it was Einstein that said that reality is merely an illusion, albeit a fairly persistent one. And I think that's a good place to start. So there's lots of ways we can kind of trick our brain into thinking we have a different reality. So as Tim said at the beginning, in terms of the sort of the evolution of VR from TV, etc., to where it is today, similarly, VR just offers us another way to kind of change our reality or trick our brain to think that something else is going on. So, for example, we know that we can trick our brains to think we're happier than we are just by smiling. Just the simple act of smiling actually changes our reality, and it releases a load of neurotransmitters. So it can help us to trick our brain thinking that we are happier than we are. And VR offers us that ability to be able to do that. And the research is fairly in its infancy, really. We're just starting to understand how this works. But Einstein's up there because obviously he's a dude, but also because there's a famous experiment run by a bunch of research at the University of Barcelona, where they asked the question, can becoming Einstein make you smarter? So this whole idea, this whole area of embodiment when it comes to VR is really interesting. So Tim said right back at the beginning, they use VR to sort of either create experiences that are either crazy expensive or impossible. And the idea of becoming somebody else through VR is great, because that's obviously an impossibility, but by putting on a VR headset we can become Einstein. And what the research has found is that it does actually. Becoming Einstein does improve your ability on a whole range of cognitive tests. Also, though, from a D&I point of view, what's interesting was it reduced your implicit bias towards elderly people. So absolutely, it changes your reality. And I think this is a really exciting concept. So moving beyond, as Belinda said, that kind of, very worthy and very worthwhile place for VR in terms of, I saw that we got Karen on from MOJ, who's a good friend of People Labs. MOJ, for example, using VR to help people understand if, working in a prison environment is for them. So working in becoming a train driver, is that for you? That's a really great way to use VR. But I think going beyond that to really experience different realities is very exciting. So particularly from a D&I point of view. So again, more experiments around this idea of using VR for embodiment. One of the pieces of research looked at, by allowing people to go into a child's body, they exhibited more playful and childlike behaviours. And, loads of research. Again, I saw we got Ian Dodds on as well. He was an absolute diversity and inclusion guru, and amazing work that he does. We know that, unconscious bias training, there's the jury's out as to whether it really works, because the whole problem with unconscious bias is your biases are often unconscious, and you've got to kind of make them conscious to even start to tackle them. But the idea of being embodied into those people who we are biased against, be it gender basis, be it you know, race basis, whatever it might be, I think is a really interesting way to really build that empathy that we're looking to build to overcome the biases that we know that we all have. So I think there's a real opportunity here for us to use VR to kind of trick our brains into, you know, from an embodiment point of view, into behaving in line with somebody or person or whatever with a different body, as an example. And as I said, the research is in its infancy, but so far it's looking pretty promising. So I think there's a, you know, I think there's a real opportunity here to use VR to help us improve our experience at work for everybody.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Tim, I know you're going to give us a few more examples. I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, there we go. I just unmuted myself. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so a couple of examples of work we've delivered. We've delivered Ramp VR, which is a training program for ground crew for IATA, the International Air Transport Association. And, you know, the premise here was that these environments are very difficult to access. So this is more in the sort of functional space of training in high risk or high value scenarios. Typically when these people were training, they didn't really get access to aircraft, and when they did have access to aircraft, of course, nothing was really wrong with them, as you would hope and expect. So we built a number of modules which had different lighting conditions. So you had daytime, nighttime, high visibility, low visibility, and then you had this error matrix on the left-hand side of the image where we pre-programmed sort of 100 different errors that were then selected at random for each experience. So, you know, part of this is it can be used as a training tool or it can be used as a testing tool. So it depends at what stage of the user journey you're on, and it allows people to, you know, to make mistakes and then for facilitators to then talk about it and bring attention to it. You know, I don't think many VR experiences are entirely end-to-end at the moment. You know, they're all part of a blended learning and blended training experience. But what they do is allow people to be put in more difficult situations, whether it's high-risk training or whether it's embodiment for diversity and inclusion, and kind of talk about how it made people feel, talk about their observations. Yeah, so we were actually on our 4th product with IATA. We've delivered ground crew training, marshalling, passenger boarding bridge, and pushback for tugs. So I just hope there's an aviation industry to go back to. I'm sure there will be in some shape or form, but obviously they've been highly impacted. If we go on to the next slide, please. So this is an interesting one, perhaps more relevant in employee or customer engagement. This is a piece we did for John Lewis, and it was really, again, how do you connect John Lewis employees to their purpose? So the John Lewis Partnership, as probably most of you know, it's owned by the employees. And it was, you know, set up over 100 years ago and had very strong founding partners. So as one of their partnership days, we rebuilt this butterfly park that was basically put together by the founder. He had this strong love for gardening, and he was really talking about the values of why he built John Lewis and you know, the service that they would provide to their customers. I won't play the clip now, but I'm sure it can be circulated later. It's about a 2-minute clip. But what we do is we establish the scene, and then we have the founding partner talking to us from a vintage TV, and then it's, well, what lies ahead for John Lewis in the future? And we go off into space and into the sort of the John Lewis boardroom that's up in an upper observatory. And if we go on to the next one. Oh, Belinda, can you put it onto the next slide?
I'm going to go forward and see if it glitches. It might just be a delay. So this is the behaviour change example. If you want to start talking, it will probably catch up.
Great, thank you. So this is a representation of some work we've done for a client around behaviour change. Sadly, we're not allowed to sort of talk directly about the project because it's all NDA'd up, but a customer came to us and said, you know, they work in organisational change, they work in behaviour change. Typically, their technology when going into boardrooms had been, a whiteboard, and they would get people to talk about the challenges of running their departments, of to deal with a lot of the things I think Emma was starting to talk about, which is, what happens when you have to sack people, that emotional piece. What is the emotional challenges of running a large organization? So yeah, the brief to us was, can you get people to reveal their true behavior? Because again, as people working in business or in teams, we might have we will have a perception of how we operate. We'll have a perception of how we lead a team. We'll have a perception of how we communicate with our team. And we might think, oh, I'm really good at communicating, and I'm really good at making sure the sort of the least communicative person in the team knows what's going on. Those are all the sort of presumptions and assumptions. Oh, it's just jumped forward a slide on my one. Probably got some lag going on. So yeah, we will have a presumption of how we operate. So we built this narrative, which wasn't a rebuilding of the office environment. It was kind of like a space type environment, and a narrative where people had to listen to instructions. We had 4 people in VR. They had to work together as a team. They then went into a sort of area where they had to prepare tools. They had to collaborate on building the equipment that they would need to fulfill the task, and then they went through into a main environment where essentially they had to rebuild this escape pod, and it was all against the clock. And as the clock ran out of time, the environment got more dramatic. Rocks started falling on their head, and it kind of got down to, okay, if someone's finished their bit of the puzzle, are they going to help someone else, or are they just going to escape? And as another element to that environment, there was what we called Team B, where we had people on desktop machines, and they could interact with the people in VR. So the behavior we were trying to make people aware about was, how do you connect or interact with teams who are not in your immediate vicinity, who are in perhaps silos on the other side of the planet, but who are critical to your success. So all this, loads of metrics were captured around this piece, and again, it went to the facilitator for a debriefing. They were talked about their team performance, and then they went back in to do it again and see how they would perform better a second time round. We then did another one for this client that was around resources and ethics, because we've all got an ethical compass. Some of us might steal biscuits or notepads from the office supply cupboard. Some of us might rig the LIBOR rate or do insider trading. It's like, what's your propensity to do shortcuts or game the system in order for you to fulfill your objectives? And again, we had 6 people in VR for that, and 6 people outside of VR. And so how about, how did the cross collaboration teamwork play out in these kind of high stress or unusual environments? So they're really, really exciting projects for us to work on, and it really allowed us to build out Vision XR, which is our collaboration technology that underpins all these kind of collaborative environments that we're working on.
Fantastic, thanks, Tim. So really interested to think about, well, where is it going next?
Yeah, so we've got a slide here that what we're trying to represent actually is kind of the onboarding process. So, let's say you go to a new office and you need a quick onboarding piece. So within VR, like in the left hand, we've kind of got the sort of the cube that could be all your company assets of, okay, well, here's a more interesting interactive menu within which I can access, what do I do about meal times? What do I do about meeting times, booking a room? All your kind of registry of functional information. In the right-hand side, you could have a piece that gives you kind of video clips from your colleagues who you're about to start working with. So you might get a selection of different departments and different kind of seniorities from within the company. So it's a nice kind of like welcome pack. It's quite functional. It's like, let's do a representation of the office, but let's make the ability to access the information and items much more quickly and much more playful. So it just feels like an immersion into the space with knowledge at your hand. I mean, what we're all used to these days, obviously with the internet at our hands, is too much information at hand. So this would be a nicely curated selection of pertinent information that was delivered in a kind of rich, inspiring environment that really meant when you sort of hit your onboarding journey, you felt that you'd had a wide experience of the company. And now again, with remote being a bigger part of the puzzle, perhaps this is a way of really tying people into those company values, because you've had a feeling that you're in the company space. Okay, this is how my company likes to portray itself. Here are some sound bites from employees. Here's another information pack. And then extending that, these are a couple of environments we've been working on, which are just kind of more playful, more creative spaces. So, you know, rather than having to actually deliver a representation of the office, perhaps we just come up with a more creative environment where you could use that for onboarding, because it's a bit more fun, it's a bit more inspiring, or could be used for creative breakout sessions for your staff. So on the bottom left, you can see we've got this kind of quite big playful space, and then coming off them, like on the right hand side, we've got a number of these breakout rooms. So this is kind of really interesting area that we're looking at developing more, is providing access to these environments that are inspiring around kind of different needs within the company. It's like, do we need a kind of playful space to go to? Do we need a energetic or slightly edgy space to go to? What kind of environment do we need to go to stimulate the thinking or discussion or information transmission that we want to do right now?
Really interesting. I'd just like to bring Emma in, Emma's perspective on that kind of, I mean, it's just kind of quite out there, this concept of, you know, these creative alternative spaces, which just suddenly feels really relevant and really almost more real, given the fact that we're all sort of stuck in like a tiny little home office, and I feel like I'm here all the time, and actually something that would get me out of that. Emma, how does that work? What's the neuroscience that goes on there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we are creatures of habit, and the more we do something, the greater that neural network is in our brain. So we kind of call it rivers of thinking. So we create this kind of really deep river of thinking, if you like. For example, it's like, you know, when you go to, if you drive to work, you kind of get in your car and then suddenly you're working, you haven't really thought about how you've got there, because it becomes the unconscious competence kind of piece. And because we're creatures of habit, you know, we kind of tend to do things the way we've always done them. And there's loads of kind of, you know, science that explains why, you know, innovation techniques are really helpful, because they kind of force us to create different neural networks by making us think in different ways. And I can absolutely see that there is a real opportunity to use these environments to kind of, you know, fairly quickly and easily kind of, you know, just take us out of our kind of, you know, standard habitual way of doing things, and just make us kind of force us to think quite differently. I think, you know, a previous world, we kind of take bus people off to, you know, a different environment, whether it's a, you know, a really funky kind of cool area, meeting place, or a hotel, whatever it might be. So yes, we must take people out of the office environment, take them somewhere else to think differently. And I can see there's a real opportunity here to do some really cool stuff to get people thinking differently in some really different environments that aren't the classic kind of, you know, conference room at a hotel, or if we're lucky, maybe Alton Towers or something. So I could see that would really work to get people thinking differently and creatively.
Love it. Thank you. Yeah, I've definitely uttered those words many times as a sort of facilitator about the necessity to get out of the office into a more creative space. So yeah, that really resonates. Tim, what else? Where else is this stuff going?
Yeah, well, because we're kind of sort of continuing that theme of putting people in different environments. And I really liked, Emma, what you were saying about the Einstein piece, about, you know, perhaps be immersed as Einstein, see yourself as Einstein, and have a different sort of biochemical response to yourself and your environment. So we've talked about in the first slide, you know, having access to your office environment with perhaps some video sound bites from staff and perhaps a nice index of information. And then we've gone to, oh, okay, well, let's ramp that up and provide a slightly more creative space for people to think about. Perhaps let's have an Einstein room where people can be embodied as Einstein for a moment. And then the next stage could be, well, let's create some environments where the empathy piece is played out. And to begin with, is that another little room coming off that creative space where people have got to work off a challenge together? Or is it the the embodiment piece around discrimination, around empathy, around presumption, around subconscious bias. Do we put people into rooms together where they can go in, and perhaps does it feel safe to explore those themes in a way which is quite strong, like embodied as someone else, embodied as someone that you might have a subconscious bias to, and then be able to be facilitated and talk about how that all feels. So it's kind of like another strand. So we've kind of got a 3-tiered approach here to what the employee experience in VR might look like. The quite functional with the nice onboarding experience, then the kind of creative space, and then the empathy or the emotional facilitation of conversation and dialogue around what might be previously considered challenging areas. But I think as there's those areas that we consider challenging to discuss are more and more up for discussion these days, and people are more kind of open to having what might be tough conversations because they know that there's gold underneath them. So if we can, make that process easier and in some ways fun, but then, a bit challenging, but then there's a nice resolution coming out of it. These are kind of some really interesting strands for employee experience.
Mm.
And here we have it in action. So this is an agency called Achtung, who in lockdown rebuilt their office so everyone could still go and have the Friday social. What's interesting here is that they chose just to rebuild the office, but you can see the psychology of that. It's like everyone's feeling detached from the office. Everyone's familiar with the office. Let's get them back in it in some way. And we feel that we've got a kind of reconnection piece going up. So you could see if this was something that was used while people still had the option to actually physically visit, then actually creating a creative version of the Achtung office experience off it is the logical next step.
I love it. And, Zoom does many, many wonderful things. Actually facilitating a free-flowing, organic social conversation isn't one of them. So actually taking it beyond Zoom to Friday drinks or leaving drinks or whatever celebrations in a virtual space is really fascinating. Really.
Yeah, and celebrations within companies and within projects is really important. So imagine having a space you can go to that isn't just the bar, which isn't just alcohol. It's kind of perhaps what company has done has updated the celebration material. So you've all got confetti cannons or hot air balloon fillers that you can just fill to abnormal sizes. One of the things we're building as a sort of fun project internally is just a kind of huge outsized art gallery and stuffing it full of sculptures like those big Jeff Koons sculptures and really playing with the size. It's kind of fun to do that and go and hang out.
Really interesting. Thank you. Fascinating. And yeah, and coming back to Einstein, the space, so being in a different space and then being in a different person, one of the classic design thinking kind of ideation warm-up activities is kind of how would insert brand X approach his problem. Apple, Mars, Enron, whatever. You can have a very broad-ranging conversation about all the different ways that different sorts of organizations would approach something. But imagine if you did that with Howard Einstein, how would I don't know, can't think of another person off the top of my head, Steve Jobs, whoever approached this could, so different people in different spaces to approach problems. That's fascinating. Could riff on that for a long time. But we said we would give some really practical thoughts on how to get, because it sounds so exciting and it really works. So how do you get started with it?
Well, I reckon, the only way to get started with something is to try it. So I would suggest if anyone's sort of keen on looking at this, go and get yourself a standalone device like a Quest and get involved. Go and try some content and try some experiences. And Rec Room is a really good kind of entry level experience. It's kind of quite playful. It's free. You'll have conversations with people you've never met before. It's really good fun.
So get yourself an Oculus Quest, about 400 quid, you say?
That's right. Okay,
so that's how you would get into it and then get into a games room and start to experience it. So you've just got that sort of very visceral sense of what it is. And then if you want to build it into your programs.
Yeah, so if you actually want to go, okay, I've experienced this, I'm kind of interested by it, I'm thinking about how do I integrate it into my company strategy, then it's like anything. It's like identify the problem you want to solve. Now, some of what you might have just heard is, maybe I can use it to inspire my team. Maybe I can use it to have conversations around difficult subjects. Maybe it helps me get a period of remote distancing and bringing the team together. No, what is your problem? What is the immediate problem that you need to solve? And then, very similar to any project, what are the goals within that project? Is it a feeling that the team has felt more connected, that we've been able to discuss these conversations around subconscious bias, or that we've just felt more involved and understanding of the company's strategy, and that the company is really thinking of me to provide these different solutions and environments to help my growth and help my integration within the company. And then, as part of any project, I define some stretch goals. So if you've identified your immediate problem, which is I want people to feel more connected, on the top of that, with the stretch goal, be that people feel a greater willingness or greater need to come and use these type of environments for other problems. So the initial problem we wanted to solve was the feeling of remote teams feeling the need to be connected, but actually by creating other rooms for them, we've been able to tackle these kind of existing or ongoing problems that haven't been addressed. So that's your stretch goal, is you've solved your immediate need of bringing the team together in these spaces that provide an opportunity to be embodied or have different kind of psychological response. And then a stretch goal is when we've really been able to tackle these issues that kind of been around for a long time.
Great.
So as with any project, it would be, let's workshop, let's get a couple of experts in the room. Let's get Fathom and People Lab in the room who understand how organizations work, who understand the psychology of how people work. And obviously Future Visual, we can help with that content creation. And we have a platform called Vision XR, which is all ready to go off the bat. It brings people together using VR, AR, desktop or mobile. That infrastructure, that platform, that network is already there. So yeah, if any of this is interesting to you, let's have a conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. So I'd love to know questions. As I have got a poorly finger, I'm struggling to drive quite as elegantly as I'd like to. So if anybody could tell me, I know Frank, you had a comment in the chat, which is great, but any other questions in the chat or any other questions that you'd like to share with us now, go ahead. I've got one for Tim whilst anybody else is adding them to chat. Emma, I'm going to ask if there's anything. I'll come to you, Emma, in a minute to see if there's anything on the chat. Something about motion sickness. I know the last time, the times that I have used VR, I do suffer terribly from motion sickness, and it was a thing. Is that improving? What's the deal with motion sickness?
Yeah, well, normally when people get motion sickness, we generally think it's because the content has been badly built. Either it hasn't been optimized to run at a sufficiently high frame rate, or the locomotion system is just not great. So when you move in virtual reality, when you move through the scene in a kind of linear direction, there's a disconnect there because your brain, as we had in slide 2, thinks it's real, but the fluids inside your ears don't think it's real. So you get this disconnect that makes you feel ill. I think for some people, if traditionally they do really suffer from motion sickness, like just getting in a car kind of makes you feel ill, there's probably going to be an issue at some point. But by using Vision XR, you can still join in the experience on your tablet or your desktop whilst other people are in there in VR. So yeah, to answer the question, it's been an ongoing problem, but we think it comes down to bad practice and not well optimized scenes.
Great, thank you. What other questions?
Got a few comments coming through now. So Ian's got a question. But as a white man, could VR be used to help me understand what life is like for a black man? I would say, Ian, that's a possibility. From the studies that I've read, certainly that's the whole embodiment piece is definitely a key area of research for people in the field of psychology, behavior, VR, etc. I don't know if you know anything specific on that, Tim, but the stuff that I've read is sort of saying that that's absolutely a very real possibility in terms of the functionality of the tech.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my area of expertise. I can tell you what it can do. It could make you feel embodied as a black man. You could see yourself in a mirror. You could see yourself having that conversation, and then once you've had that conversation, we could play that content back, and you could see it from a third party. So you would see yourself talking as another ethnicity, and you could see that any judgments arise. So there's tools to make you feel embodied and to witness conversations in ways that you previously might not have. Obviously, we can make you experience perhaps getting rejected at a queue. So if you kind of queue in somewhere and you're getting biased at that point, or you're just getting ignored, or other ethnicities, sexes are just getting waved past you, you can go, well, how does that feel? Because perhaps as a white man, you may not have experienced that. It depends, you know, what's your problem and your hypothesis? If you have a hypothesis that is a consistent factor, then we can build that hypothesis and get people to experience it.
I mean, if you think back to days before VR, you know, the infamous Zimbardo prison officer experiment in the 1960s, which had to be abandoned, where they kind of assigned people to either prisoner or prison officer role, and they had to abandon it because people took on what they perceived to be the behaviours of those roles back in the 60s. To such an extent, they had to abandon the experiments halfway through. So I think that, you know, it would seem that that's very much the case. So definitely interesting to look into that a little bit further. Got another question here from Isabel. How did you measure the success of VR activities in the behaviour change case study you presented? Were they successful? Great question.
Yeah, so I don't actually have all the data about that because we built the environment for the client. We built the metrics for them. I know actually that they just partnered with a university in the States who are kind of experts in this sort of data analysis and value analysis. But to answer the question as best as I can, we created metric hooks for things like a number of interactions with objects, amount that someone moved around the scene, amount that someone talked to someone else, amount of times that even when they had completed their task, they went to check if other people needed help or needed completion of their part of the subject. So those are the kind of sort of snapshot of some of the metrics that we provided. They were all compiled into a database for the facilitators to then talk to the subjects between sessions. I now know that's gone on a step further, and it will be sort of providing automated feedback or adaptive feedback in every session. And in terms of the IATA, the training piece, the airport training piece, the metrics around that were, did people spot all the errors? How long did they take? So it was kind of much more, much clearer on the tasks that needed to be finished and the kind of time, the amount of time that was expected to be taken.
Cool. Got another question here. Thanks for that, Tim. Charlotte, I love that the VR development will work across different platforms from mobile right through to full VR. Could you expand on this?
Sure. So yeah, we see, or having talked to people in the space who are customers for a long time, is that obviously having a VR headset is a big barrier. You know, it's a big cost item. They're always in fixed locations. So we built a platform, Vision XR, and what it means is that as long as you have access to one of those devices, you can be in the same immersive space together. Now, obviously, when you're looking at it on your mobile, your brain is not going, oh, wow, I am standing in front of this jet engine. I am being passed this cowling back and forth. You know, you're in that kind of more observer view. But the trainers or the people who are in the immersive scene are able to demonstrate learnings or teachings around equipment and environments that aren't physically available. And that can be entirely distributed. Those are people from all over the world can be in the same immersive scene together. There's actually a film on our website under the Vision XR tab of it in action. And what we've built in is agency on any device. So within the VR environment, there's things like airflow. You can open the engine and close it. We have X-ray tool. But even if you're on a mobile, you still have the ability to open and close the engine to trigger events. So whatever device you're on, you still have agency in the scene. And we've tested it so you can actually be in a moving car on your mobile, talking to people in the immersive environment whilst you're triggering events. And that's kind of people distributed all around the world at the same time. So it's providing a kind of virtual layer to your teams. It's a bit like the sort of interesting creative spaces we had in one of the slides. It's really a virtual augmentation to your office or your team's activities.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm aware that we're very nearly out of time, and I do want to give you everybody a minute or so before they have to get to their next Zoom meeting, no doubt. So thank you so much, Tim, for joining us and for answering those questions. We will nod if I'm correct, Katie, Charlotte, share the deck with you afterwards. Yes, we will share the deck with everybody afterwards. So thank you so much. There are some links in there, and when we share, we will include in there some of the answers to the questions that we haven't managed to address. Do stay in touch with us. You can find us on all of those social channels. As I said, as Tim said, I think the next step, if this feels like something you'd like to build into any element of your EX, or even if you'd like to explore where it can fit into your EX, then let's think about how we can to do some really creative virtual workshopping with you. Thank you as ever to Emma, who just always brings such genius to any of these conversations. So it's always, as I said, friend, colleague, partner. It's always wonderful to have you. And thank you to everybody else for joining us. And I probably just talked over your chance to grab a coffee before your next thing. So I will dial out. Thank you so much for joining us, and do get in touch with any questions. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you all.